Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our time. Welcome to Friday. Glad that you decided to carve out some time to join us. I'm assuming that maybe you were here with us on Monday when we kind of kicked off this personal interpersonal effectiveness course. If not, we'll do a little review at the beginning of it. But let me just do a quick introduction. My name is Bob Foose, and I work with Newleaf Training and Development, and we partnered with Fresno City College to offer these staff development programs for you. So our mission with Newleaf is to help people and organizations be their best. And we offer a lot of different things, from one-on-one consulting to seminars to e-learning, coaching, keynotes, different things like that. And like I said, my name is Bob Foose, and I'm one of the consultants and trainers with Newleaf. I live down here in Orange County, so I'm coming to you live from my office here in Orange County, California. And what else could I tell you about me? So I've got a master's degree in leadership development, graduate certificate in organizational development, work with a number of different clients and organizations really to help them communicate better and lead better and collaborate better. And so focus mainly on leadership and communication, team building, conflict resolution, and different things like that. So looking forward to being with you all for our time today. So let's do a little review, okay, to kind of start off our time. Maybe some of you weren't here with us on Monday. So we're talking about personal and interpersonal effectiveness. And really what we're talking about is, what are the characteristics of people that are enjoyable to work with? What are the characteristics of people that get results in what they do and they're able to work well with other people? They're good at influencing other people. So people are willing even to be influenced by them, right? Now, we're not talking about like social media influencers, but people that have an influence on other people at work and are enjoyable to work with. So what characterizes those folks? So we started off on Monday, you might remember, sharing this diagram, and it just simply stands for the idea that our perceptions drive our behaviors that drive our results. So when we think about the results that we get in life and at work, and maybe currently you're getting great results, maybe you're really enjoying the people you're working with, maybe you're seeing your goals accomplished, maybe not. But those results are simply the byproduct of our perceptions and our behaviors, which ultimately are driven by the principles that we center our life around. You might remember when we talked on Monday, we talked about principles are those things, they're objective and they're universal and they're true, and they exist really without our permission. You know, these are the things that are sort of like the furniture of the universe, right? Like gravity might be one of those things, right? You might think about the golden rule and different things like that. If you revolve your life around principles that make sense, that's going to influence your perception, which will influence your behavior, which will get you good results. And so that's what we're talking about, is some principles that really characterize people that are personally and interpersonally effective. So for those of you that were here last time, we talked about a couple other things. So let me have you do this, either unmute yourself or put something in the chat. What do you remember from last time? As you think back all the way back to Monday, what do you remember from our time, or what do you remember us talking about? We kind of focus on two main things, really. Anything? I could pick on Arian. I know you were here last time. Arian, so you could tell it was coming, right? Yeah, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but does anything remember from last time?
So what I remember the most, because I've given it a lot of thought and also practiced it, was how to phrase our language in a more positive light, because that really affects how we perceive what we're talking about, and also our tone is it makes a huge impact on the people around us. Um, so
Yeah,
that was my number one takeaway.
I love it. That's great. And it sounds like you've been thinking about it this week. Have you noticed things like, well, why did I say it that way? Or should I have said it differently?
Yeah, and I also notice the way that other people say it, and now I can understand like I get more like what they're feeling, because now I'm paying attention to the kind of words that they use and their tone.
Yeah, that's good. That makes sense. Yeah. So we talked about that. We started off talking about this idea of people that are personally and interpersonally effective. Their perspective is that they see themselves in service to others, right? They see themselves not as, always wanting to be served by others, but being willing to serve other people. And you might remember that we did this exercise, if you were here last week, or if you were here on Monday, where we just had you think about, who are the people in my life, either in my personal life or my professional life, who are those folks that are are my customers, right? Who are the people that need something from me or want something from me, that in some way I'm in service to them? And we had you think about, well, what do they need from you? Right. And it might be weird to kind of think about some people, maybe to think about your friends as customers or even your boss as a customer. But the reality is, a customer is anybody that just needs something from you, that gets some sort of product from you, whatever that is. And so we had you take some time to think about that. And then, just like Arian was talking about, we talked about how our words really do influence others. We talked about the idea of emotional contagion, right? And the emotions that you give off from your words and the atmosphere that you give off from the words and the things you say not only affects you and even your own energy, but it really does impact other people. We asked the question, who likes to be around really negative people? And I think everybody pretty much said no. And so we talked about, how do you rephrase some of the things that you say in order to be more positive and more productive and more forward looking? Instead of saying, but, say and, right? In So we looked at some different things like that. Instead of talking about things that you must do or you have to do or you should do, we talked about saying things more in terms of what you get to do, or what you will do, these kinds of things. Just even a simple turn of phrase like that can really make a big difference in our own feelings and our own perceptions, and also others as well. So those are the two things we talked about last time. We're going to dive into two more this time during the time that we have together. We're specifically going to talk about the power of listening, and then we're going to be talking about giving and receiving feedback. Because what we find is people that are personally and interpersonally effective, they listen and they listen well, and they also really know how to both give and receive feedback well. So let's dive into this idea of listening. So let me ask you this, and you can put something in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself. But how would you answer this question? What are some things that prevent us from listening to others well? So what are your thoughts on that? Again, feel free to put something in the chat, unmute yourself. But what have you observed? What are some things that prevent us from listening to others well? Let's hear from a few folks. Hmm. Keelan, thank you so much. Yeah, feel I'm too busy at the time, right? I've just got so much going on. It can be really hard to focus on somebody else and really listen to them. Yeah, yeah. There's sometimes you're with people, they're just talk way too much about themselves and their own issues. It's like, I can listen, but I can only go so far, right? If all you're doing is talking about yourself, that's no fun at all. Yeah, or people can get distracted by work. There could be all kinds of different things that keep us from really listening well, whether that's, the business of life. There's all kinds of things going on. We find that, work has just increased. I remember back in the day, we used to talk about 9 to 5, right? Maybe it was just back in my day, but, now I don't even know if anybody talks about it. It's like 9 to 5, it's more 8 to 6 or 8 to 10, or whatever it is, right? Or it's 8 to 8, so just the busyness of life. And then I don't think we can underestimate how much it's impacted us just to always be in touch, right? We are never that far away from our cell phone. We've got email, we've got text, we've got Twitter, we've got Slack, we've got Facebook. There's just all kinds of different ways that we can communicate with people. Others can communicate with us. And often that's a distraction too. How many times have you maybe been at dinner with somebody, or you're hanging out with somebody and they get a text and they go from talking to you to focusing on their phone, right? Or it's just really easy to do that. I think I mentioned, I work at Disneyland as well. And I just think it's so funny. I'll walk around the park sometimes and I'll think, people have spent a lot of money to be at Disneyland, and I'll walk around and there'll be people just sitting on benches looking at their phone. And I think, why are you doing that? You've spent so much money to be here. But we can get really distracted by those things. Now, maybe they're making dinner reservations or posting great pictures. Who knows? But the reality is, listening is an incredibly important part of, certainly, of life, of work. Sure, we've heard this quote or a similar version, right? You've got 2 ears, one mouth, so we need to listen twice as much as you speak. Listening, it's been said, is really a gift that we give to other people. When you think about people that you enjoy working with, you enjoy being with, odds are they're probably pretty good listeners and they're willing to listen to you. So put some thoughts in the chat for this. How does it affect you when someone doesn't listen to you? They're not listening. They're on their phone, they're on their computer, whatever it is, or you can tell their eyes are kind of glossing over. What are your thoughts? A little frustrated, a little annoyed. You know, Keelan, talk more about that if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself. And I apologize if I'm not pronouncing your name right. But yeah,
Don't worry,
what is it about
nobody
that?
gets it. I think it's
Well, what
more
is
that,
it? How would I pronounce it correctly?
Kalon, K like Kmart, lawn like go out and mow it.
Kaylon,
That's
there
the
you
closest
go.
you're going to get.
I love it.
But it's primarily when folks say, hey, can you do something for me? Can you help me with something else? And you spend a lot of time doing it, or you're dropping what you're doing, which for example, sometimes some of the stuff I'm doing is really a higher priority for me, but I thought, okay, if I can get them helped out, it'll get them sort of off my back, let them get done what they have to do, and I can go on and do my own. Yeah. Or somebody asks for help and you're saying, okay, but when you start to give it to them, it's like, oh, hold on, I've got a text, from this, or, oh, I want to grab that phone, or, oh, sorry, I don't have time now. I'm thinking, well, why did you contact me for this? Or, why didn't you give me a time when maybe it's going to be better for you? And I've done the same thing to other folks too. Somebody, I'll ask somebody for help and they get on, they're trying to help me, and it might be my boss, or it might be somebody I've been waiting to hear back from so I can get something accomplished. I mean, I'm guilty of the same thing that I get frustrated with others about.
Sure. Yep, but yeah, that's super frustrating in those situations. And Z talked about, you begin to feel like you're not important, right? Like they've got something better to do with somebody else, and like, well, why did you even want to talk to me? And I like Fran, you do something to get their attention. Fran, talk about that. What does that look like?
Hold on, sorry, I gotta mute myself.
Oh,
well, you know what? We let our phones, I'm from our old generation, okay? I'm 66 years old and phones aren't important to me. I answer the phone. For example, let's say I'm eating dinner. That's the phone's not important as far as I'm concerned. It will go to voicemail. If it's an emergency, they'll call 911. They don't have to get me right now. It's important that I talk to you. That one time my son, I hadn't seen him in 3 months. I'm living up here. I go to LA. We're eating and he answers the phone and I go, excuse me, I haven't seen you in 3 months. You can't give me an hour. You have to answer your phone. And see, that's my son. And I felt I could go there like that. But it was like, you're important to me. I want to be important to you. And then he would be like, I'm sorry, Mom. From the younger generation, for some reason, it kills them not to answer that phone. I don't know what it is, but they can't do it. And I'm like, I don't get that. But I'm from a different generation. We had to stop at the corner to make a phone call. There was no phone in your car.
Yeah,
so that's where I'm at. And if I'm at Disneyland, I'm going to watch things going by. Forget that phone.
Good for you. Good for you. You're going to stay focused. Yeah. That's good. That's good. But yeah, that can often happen, right? If we don't feel like they're listening to us, we're going to do something like, hey, or, look me in the eye, right? Or whatever we can do, to get their attention. We could potentially, because we desire that, we value that. We want to be listened to. So kind of you see this on your participant guide if you've got it. I think Susie also put that, or maybe Becky put that in the chat as well. If you don't have the participant guide, feel free to download that. I think that was put in the chat. But on page 8 or on page 6 of the participant guide, it talks about 5 levels of listening. So researchers have, obviously studied listening and how people listen and why they listen and things like that, and have identified 5 different levels of listening. See if you can relate to some of these. So the lowest level of listening is pretending. Okay. So someone's pretending to listen to you if they actually are just looking at their phone and they're like, yeah, right, and then maybe you ask them something or you remind them about something you said and they say, I don't remember that. Well, they obviously weren't listening to you, right? And we've all done that, right? Where we're kind of pretending somebody's saying something, but we're thinking about something else. That's just the lowest level of listening. Thank you, Susie. Appreciate you admitting that. And then the next level is defensive listening. All right. So defensive listening is you're listening, but you're just simply listening for maybe holes in somebody's argument, or you're listening. And as you're listening, you're preparing your argument, how you're going to respond. So that would be defensive listening. Excuse me. Level 3 is selective listening. All right. So let me ask you all, how do you know, or how could you tell if somebody is just simply selectively listening? What might be some indicators of that? And you can unmute yourself, put something in the chat. How would you know if somebody is selectively listening?
I would say they're giving you vague verbal responses. Yeah, right. I hear you. Absolutely.
Uh-huh. Or if some of those verbal responses don't fit what you were talking about, right? Maybe you go to them and say, oh, my cat just got run over. And they're like, oh, cool. No, that's not cool at all, right? Like you're just being selective in what you're hearing here. Yeah, so maybe what they're saying just doesn't match up with what you're saying.
Or maybe they respond to a part of your conversation, but not like the whole rest of it.
Mm.
And yeah, and you're like, well, what about everything else they just said? What?
Yeah.
I don't remember.
They don't remember any of that. Uh-huh. Yep. Yeah. So oftentimes, we listen and maybe we're just listening for the things that we want to hear, right? Or there's something that we're interested in without really listening to the other person. And then the next level, so now we're getting a little bit better, is attentive listening. So let me ask, how do you know someone is practicing attentive listening? Like what would indicate to you that somebody really is being focused in on you and they're being attentive? What might be some clues to that?
They're responding to what you're talking about and they're sharing maybe a same experience.
Mm-hmm.
So they're plugged in.
Yeah. Yeah, and that response is appropriate. It matches, it fits. Yeah. Okay, Aaron, yeah, you're making eye contact. They're actually looking you in the eye. Yeah, change in mood and responses depending on your change in mood, right? When you talk about something sad, they get sad, right? There is that sense of empathy there. Yeah, Z, they're asking questions. They want to know more. They're obviously trying to dig in and really understand. Yeah. And then the highest level of listening, kind of, Aaron, you kind of were touching on this, is that empathic listening. And that's where you go beyond listening to the words and you actually listen for the mood and the feelings behind it. And you do the best you can to really understand and really empathize with that person. So when you're listening empathically, you're not preparing your argument, you're not listening and thinking about what your response is going to be, but you really are listening to understand, and specifically understanding what's the feeling, what's the emotion that's behind the words. You're really listening to the words in between the words, so to speak, and that you want to enter into that experience. I love this quote from Stephen Covey. He said, in empathic listening, you listen with your ears, but also more importantly, you listen with your eyes and with your heart. You listen for feeling, for meaning. You listen for behavior. You use your right brain as well as your left. You sense, you intuit, you feel. And then you have to open yourself up to be influenced. And I think that's the most important thing because it kind of does put you in a vulnerable position, doesn't it? Right now, we talked earlier about how our words really do influence our moods. And certainly when listening to other people, it's important, if we're going to listen empathically, that we kind of match that, and we be willing to be influenced by that other person and not just listen to the words that they say, but to listen to the emotion behind it. Now, it's really kind of interesting. When you do this, it can actually have two different effects. I don't know if you've experienced this before, but maybe you've had this experience where you've told somebody a story about something going on in your life and you've really, kind of gotten into it. And at the end of it, you realize you know exactly what you need to do next. And maybe the other person hasn't said anything at all. Right? And that often happens, doesn't it? Maybe you just listen to somebody and they finish and they say, thank you so much. I know what I need to do now. And they just needed to process that time, right? So that's one thing that often happens. And the other thing that sometimes happens is at the end of that is, again, you've listened empathically, you've tried to draw them out and really listen for the feeling. Then they ask you, they say, well, thanks for listening. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And they're in a much better place, or I should say, way more open to listening to what you have to say. But maybe before that, if you hadn't listened to them, maybe you tried to give advice. Oftentimes people don't receive that, right? Because they need to feel understood first before they give that advice. So these are often two things that you find happen if you're practicing that attentive and empathic listening. So here's what we're going to do. This might be kind of strange, but we're going to put you in breakout rooms to give you some time to practice this, okay? So we got a smaller group here. So I've just put you in, we've got two different groups, okay? So one room, it's got 3 people. One room has 2 people. And then I think, Susie, because you're maybe the host, you can jump into whichever room you want to, if you want to here, okay? But I'm going to give you, let's give you like, It's 3:22. I'm going to give you 8 minutes to practice this, okay? So the way that we're going to do this is, especially if we have 3 people in the room, we'll have one person is the talker, one person is the listener to practice this empathic listening, and the other person will sort of be the coach. All right, so if you're the talker, maybe think about something going on in your life, something that you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about, and that you could talk about for maybe 3-4 minutes or so, right? And then the person that's the listener, practice maybe responding to some of the emotion, practice giving them your full attention, okay, which might be a challenge even here on Zoom, right? And then the person that's the coach, after maybe about 3-4 minutes of them telling that story, coach the 2 people, coach the person especially that's listening, tell them what they did well, maybe if there's any advice for what they could have done differently, feel free to give them that advice. And then if you're the talker, feel free to coach the listener too. Is there something you feel like they did well in listening, something they could have done differently? All right. So like I said, we're going to give you probably like 7-8 minutes for this. We'll come back at 3:30 if that sounds okay. Does that make sense?
Yep.
All right. Awesome. So again, one person talker, one person listener, and then one person will be the coach. All right. We'll see you back here, and then we'll hear how that experience was. Here you go. All right. Welcome back, everybody. So maybe that felt like a long time. Maybe it felt like a short time. Not quite sure. But I know we just had 2 groups. So I'd love to maybe hear from maybe one person from each group, either whether you were the talker, or the listener, or the coach. How did it go? What did you observe? What were some things maybe the listener did well? What could they have done to improve? Yeah, what were some things that came out?
Well, I was the talker and it went really well. The listener was very attentive, and I did need to be a little more clear on what my point was. It was, I'm a talker.
Okay, all right.
So,
First off, Fred, no, you did not need to be more clear at all.
okay.
You were talking. That was my job as a listener, to try to figure out what it was that you were talking about. What was your frustration? I know there was a frustration there, but I felt that was my job to figure out what the frustration was. You did fine.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
That's good. Yeah, maybe let's hear from the listeners. What was that experience like for you all as listeners? Easy, hard?
Well, like
I was the listener, Bob.
Oh, you were, Susie, you were the listener? Who else?
Yeah.
Kaylon, were you the listener as well?
Yeah, and that was hard because I'm more of a talker, and I also had somebody doing some work on the house. So I was, and I'm hard of hearing, so I had my earphones in cranked up. I had the headset on. I've got the computer cranked up. And I was putting the laptop towards my face to go, okay, I'm really supposed to be listening here. What do I have to do on my end to help with that?
Wow. I mean, what a great example, right, of all kinds of distractions or things that could keep us from really being able to focus well. Yeah, so good job trying to minimize those distractions. How about for those that were the talkers? What was that like to have somebody really listen to you like that?
It was good. It shows that she cared and she actually paid attention. She was asking a lot of questions, and she was very encouraging. So it makes me feel good that I'm being heard. I guess you could say that.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, it was really good. We had their attention.
Uh-huh.
And my biggest problem is stretching out the story. I need to get to the point.
Okay, good to know. Yeah, great to know that about yourself. How about for those that were the coaches and kind of listening in? What were some things that you all observed?
So I just by chance became the coach.
Okay, all right.
I don't think really assigned who was doing what, but when Susie started responding, I was like, okay, this is good. I'll just be the coach. And it's interesting that Susie responded in that way, that she wasn't sure who was feeling frustrated, in whether it was Fran or whether it was the instructor, based off of Fran's conversation, because I can relate to Fran's experience, so I knew exactly what she was talking about. But I think Susie did a really good job just responding back and trying to grasp the situation. So she was very attentive and empathic, as I would assume, because she was trying to understand the feelings of whether it was Fran's feelings or whether it was the faculty members' feelings.
That's good. That's good. Nice. Who else was the coach? Arian, were you the coach in the other group?
Yeah. So it went really well. So Kaylon was the listener for our group, and she listened very well, and she, her responses were different depending on what was being said. She was very empathetic, and she asked really good questions to find out more information about the topic, and she had some really great suggestions and some great empowering things to say that were all better than I could have phrased it, and I was impressed. And so I had no idea that Kaylon was struggling to hear anything from my perspective. It seemed like she was doing a fantastic job. So yeah.
That's great. Yeah, that's good. Good that that's what you picked up on. One of the acronyms that I sometimes teach people in classes is WAIT. Right. So if you're talking to somebody and maybe you're not listening, just think of the acronym WAIT, and it just stands for why am I talking? Right. So just got to step back and realize I need to listen to this other person. Right. They've got a story to tell too. And that's okay. I don't always need to be the one talking. So whatever's happening, you're talking in your mind, wait, why am I talking? And then give the other person a chance. And like I said, it really is a gift that you give to somebody else. And as we're talking about being personally and interpersonally effective. We've talked about the power that our words have, but maybe even more so is the power of our silence, right? The power of us being able to really sit with somebody who's maybe going through a difficult time or they're experiencing a challenge, and to not, jump in right away with our advice, not jump in right away with our thoughts or even our story, right? But to really sit and listen to them, let them tell their story, can be a huge gift that we can give to somebody else. Yeah. So in many ways, you're not doing anything. You're just listening, but you're listening not only with your ears, but also with your heart, with your eyes, with your mind. And so it really is a lot of work. And that's why few people commonly practice it. All right. So we've talked about how important listening is. And so let's get into this idea of giving and receiving feedback. Okay. So I'm not sure if you love giving feedback, you love receiving it. I think all of us have had different experiences with giving and receiving feedback, maybe especially either from friends or in a work situation. But let me ask you this again in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself. When you think about, whether it's in work or just even in your personal life, why is giving and receiving feedback to one another so important? Why is this so necessary? What are your thoughts? Let's hear from a couple folks.
That's how you know how to improve. You don't know what you don't know until someone points it out to you. You don't know, what you could be doing better until someone opens that idea up to you. You don't know sometimes what your strengths are until someone points it out to you. So I personally, as a creative writer, I find feedback incredibly important because there's so many different perspectives that people can take on like a single sentence. There's so many different ways to read the same thing. So yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's great. As an artist, right? Artists crave that. They value that feedback, right? Is this speaking to you? Is this the best way to phrase this? These kinds of things. Yeah. So helpful to make your work the best it could possibly be. Other thoughts? What else have you received? What benefits do you get from either giving or receiving feedback?
You can find your own and other strengths and weaknesses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
and
really
it's
good.
Like Arian said, go for improving it. I was working overseas at a company one time, and I was a presenter for Fortune 500 executives over there. And they would record us occasionally so that we could sit back in the room and see ourselves. And I had no idea that I said the word 30 times in under 3 minutes. I was so conscious of saying after that, I was able to knock it back, but I wasn't even aware I was doing it until I saw myself videotaped.
Yep. That's it. We all have these blind spots in our lives, right? And these things that we're just not aware of until somebody else maybe points it out. We have no idea, maybe there's some verbal thing that we're doing or a way that we're standing or something like that. Yeah, that we just don't know until somebody says. Yeah. How about giving feedback? We've talked about receiving feedback, but why is giving feedback so important? Oh, Z, yeah, thank you. Giving feedback allows others to see what information they wouldn't have known or see. Getting feedback allows us to reflect, and grow professionally, personally. Yeah. So we all value that receiving feedback, and that just underscores the value of giving feedback, right? And it can be uncomfortable sometimes. I know oftentimes when I'm, teaching class or something, and I'll ask the other students maybe to give feedback on somebody's presentation. They all often say very happy things and positive things. And I think that's really good, but oftentimes we're so afraid of giving even more constructive feedback. But those are often the things that we treasure the most, right? I mean, we all need that productive and positive feedback, but giving constructive feedback is also very important, but it's kind of an art form as well. Oh, the feedback might be true for us too. Yeah, something ourselves we should keep in mind. Yeah, that's good. This is something I'm growing in as well. I need to learn more about this too. I think that's a great thing to think about. So I want you to think about a time when you received some really effective feedback. You're really happy to receive that feedback. Maybe it was from a coworker, a boss, a friend. They gave you some feedback, and maybe it was even developmental, constructive. Maybe it was real positive. Whatever it was, you were just really happy to receive it. Okay. So put in the chat, what are some adjectives that would describe how you felt to receive that feedback, or how it made you feel? Put in the chat. Again, you were happy to, it was good feedback. You really appreciated it. How did it make you feel? Valued from Susie. Makes you blush. Okay. Yeah, maybe a little embarrassed. Am I really that person? Maybe a little bit of that. Grateful, aware of what you're doing. Yeah. Thankful for it, maybe. Yeah. That's what we find. Usually when people think back to times when they were given, again, could be constructive or positive feedback, and they felt really good about it. It really maybe built their confidence. It really helped them feel valued. It felt important, even noticed, right? Somebody was willing to notice me and actually willing to help me improve. Like that says a lot about that person, right? And how much they value you. Yeah, gave you good direction, made you aware of how you are to others. Yeah, that's great. There's a lot of power in that. Now think about a time when you got really negative feedback, right? Or maybe it just wasn't delivered very well. Maybe the feedback was true, could have been positive or more constructive, but it just wasn't delivered very well at all. So think about, what adjectives would you use to describe how it felt to receive that negative feedback? Okay, so Susie, maybe a little defensive, right? And what else? What other thoughts? A little demoralizing, disappointing, angry, unmotivated. Yeah. Probably in some sense, it made you feel less than who you really were, right? It didn't build you up. It kind of tore you down, discouraged, unmotivated. Yeah. So there's real power in being able to deliver feedback well, isn't there? And there's few things that are as demotivating and demoralizing as maybe even true feedback that's delivered in a poor way. So what I want to do is teach you just a real simple model, a way to think about giving feedback to others. So based on something that our friend William Shakespeare once said, right? Shakespeare once said, "To be or not to be, that is the question," right? So one of the famous lines that he wrote, I think for Hamlet, right? So to be or not to be, that is the question. All right. So when we're giving feedback, when should we use the verb to be, and when should we use the verb to do? All right, so here's the simplest way to think about this. Whenever you're giving positive feedback to somebody, complimenting them on some things or some good things that they've done, then it's fine to use the verb to be, right? You are a pleasant person to be around. You are a good worker. You are a great writer, these kinds of things, right? You can use the verb to be when you're giving positive and productive feedback. You never want to use the verb to be when you're giving more constructive feedback. Then you always want to use the verb to do. So you would never want to say to somebody something like, "You are lazy," or you are a terrible writer, things like that. Like that only serves to tear the person down. But you could say, you didn't perform the task that I asked you to do last Thursday. Real simple, right? Or instead of using an adjective, it'd be better to use a verb in that situation, right? It's more about the behavior, the actual actions, as opposed to who the person is. So this is a real simple rule of thumb. Whenever you're giving more constructive feedback, you always want to point out, yeah, thank you, Arian, focus on behavior and not on the person themselves. But when you're giving more positive things, yes, you can definitely talk about behavior, but that's the one time it's okay to also kind of talk about the person and the good things that they are in their lives. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. Let me just see before we move on, any questions about that or thoughts about that? Just want to make sure that that's really clear.
Thank you for sharing that, Bob. I was going to mention earlier that sometimes it's hard to give feedback. So.
Oh, right. Because you're not quite sure what to say, how to say it, anything like that. Yeah. Or how the person's going to respond to it. So someone's going to respond to it much better if you could talk about specific behavior. Yeah. All right. So odds are that you remembered that positive feedback that somebody gave you because it probably was delivered well, right? And what really stuck in your mind about that negative feedback is it wasn't delivered well. Maybe they did use more of a to be verb, or it was really general, right? Maybe it was some sort of attack. You felt it as more of an attack on your character or something like that, right? So that's why it's really important that we keep those two things very separately. All right. So, for example, if somebody has maybe been late to a meeting, okay, you don't want to say you're irresponsible and you don't care about our team. You don't want to say something like that. Instead, maybe say, I noticed you've been about 10 to 15 minutes late for our last 3 staff meetings. Is everything okay? So to point out specific behavior and then to ask a follow-up question about that, right? So again, not assume that there was malicious intent or anything like that, but to just discover a little bit more about that specific behavior. So would love to hear your thoughts. So those are some things that I have, when to use the verb to do and to be. What are some of your best practices for either giving or receiving feedback? What are some things to do? What are some things to not do? Again, feel free to unmute yourself, put something in the chat. Let's focus first actually on just giving feedback. What are some of your thoughts on how to best give feedback to other people?
Personally, I like to focus on the language. So for instance, I teach creative writing classes for free in the evenings in the community. And so what I do is when I critique someone's work, I say, this is how you can be doing better. This is, your work could use this kind of improvement. I try not to say, this is what you did bad, this is what you did wrong, this is what you need to stop doing. Like what I try to say is, maybe you should try I want you to experiment doing more of this in your work and see how you feel about it. I want you to think about, go read this book and see how this person handles this type of technique, and then try emulating them, because I think you could use some improvement in that area and things like that. So I try to be specific as to how they could improve, and I try to phrase it in a, this is how you can improve, not a, this is what you're doing wrong kind of way.
I love that. That's great. Like nothing would be more discouraging if you were to say somebody, well, that paragraph just doesn't read very well, and you don't give them anything else, right? It's like, oh, what do I do, right? But yeah, you're looking forward. Hey, here's how this could be made better, right? I've heard that often called feed forward, right? Instead of feedback, you can then feed forward. What can we do in the future to get even better? Great example. Other thoughts? Yeah, what could you do to do better at giving feedback to other people?
Start with the good.
Oh,
right. Tell them what they did a really good job at, and then, but here's where some improvement is needed.
Yeah, and I would even tweak that a little bit, Susie. I love that. Remember going back to what we said on Monday, instead of saying but, say and. So here are some things, and here's where some improvement is needed. Right? It's a small thing, but it can make a big difference. I love it. Yeah. Especially if you feel like maybe the person's ego is a little bit more fragile, right? And they're just not quite sure about things. To kind of be as soft as you can in giving that feedback and maybe affirming the really good things before you talk about maybe some areas to improve. That can be really helpful. That's good. Yeah, yep. Kaylin, you said that. Yeah, same thing. Yep, that's great.
I was gonna say similar to what Arian does is like, giving suggestions on improvements.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know what to do when they're just like, no. Like,
Ah,
thanks, but no. Like,
like if they don't receive that.
yeah. What do you do then?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I've got some thoughts, but be interested to hear maybe from others here on the call. Yeah, what do you do if you've got feedback? Maybe you've given the person feedback, and maybe they don't agree, they don't accept it, they don't receive it. Nobody wants to touch that one. That's too electrified.
I've had that once where I gave someone feedback, and they were just like, I'm not doing that. I don't care about what you have to say. And I was like, okay, then I'm leaving.
Hmm.
Because this is a waste of my time. But that person they were a very rude person, and they were kind of bullying other people in the workshop, and I kept telling them, this behavior is not okay. And then after they were basically like, I'm the best and I can do whatever I want and I don't care what you have to think about it. And I was like, well, we're here to discuss what we think about work. So if you're not willing
Huh.
to listen to anyone else's perspective, then I'm sorry, but you're not fitting the rules of this workshop, and I need you to leave because you're being disruptive and also clearly insulting everyone in the room. So, uh, and so as soon as that person left, everyone was like, "Oh, thank you. That person was so mean." And so, I mean, unfortunately, I did have that very negative experience, but I don't know if that was what you were looking for.
I think in those situations, well, on one hand, we can't control anybody else or make anybody else do something or believe something, right? And so some of our role is just simply to maybe give the feedback, and if they want to receive it, great. If they don't, great. Sometimes it's part of a process. I know for me, there's just been times in my life I've need to hear something 5, 6, 7, 800 times before I finally get it, right? And who knows, Becky, maybe you're the first person to point something out, and somebody says it, a year later, they're the 10th person, and then they finally get it, right? So maybe you're just beating them somewhere in that journey. So there's a little bit of that too, just being comfortable with that's okay. And the other thing I think of is sometimes it helps to combine the behavior with also your feelings and then the impact that it had. Right. So there's a model of feedback I often teach people. It's called the FBI model. I didn't invent it. I heard it from somebody else, but where you talk about feelings, behavior, and then impact. Right. So if somebody does something that you want to give them some feedback, you could say, hey, I felt really frustrated because in the meeting that we had, I thought you were going to give a report, and because you didn't, actually, the rest of the team doesn't really know what's going on, and it's going to throw off the rest of the timeline. So I've given a feeling, I'm kind of frustrated as a result of this behavior, and here's the impact that it's having on the team. Now you can also do that for a positive thing, right? Like, oh, I felt really excited, Becky, when you gave that report at the meeting because it's really going to help our team know what to do moving forward, right? Feeling, behavior, impact. So sometimes what might help the feedback land a little better is if somebody knew what's the impact that behavior is making, either positive or negative potentially. I don't know. What do you think about that?
No, that was really helpful. I'm gonna try it.
Try the
Thank you.
FBI. Yeah. See how that goes. Yeah. FBI. Remember that. Feeling, behavior, and then impact. Now, the other thing to think about is the importance of writing feedback, right? So we've talked about giving verbal feedback, but sometimes we need to give people written feedback as well, right? Sometimes in a professional setting, we need to maybe do a performance review or something like that. That can be something that's a part of our job as well. And I think the models and the things that we're talking about fit in with that too. But what I want to do is this. I think, do I have that in the next slide? Nope. Actually, I'm going to show you one thing, and I'm going to give you some time to actually write down some feedback. On the handout, I think it's on page 9 on your handout, you see this model of courage and consideration. So thinking about some mindsets that we can have as we approach this idea of giving and receiving feedback. We can have either high courage or low courage, or high consideration or low consideration. So if we're somebody that has low courage but maybe high consideration, that would be somebody that would only give positive things, right? All we're doing is telling you the great things that you're doing, how awesome you are, and things like that. We really don't have the guts or the courage to maybe give you some more constructive feedback, right? And that's not a good situation to be in. It's also not a good situation to be in a very low courage, low consideration situation, right? And that just means not only do I not really care about you, so I'm not even going to say good things about you, but I also don't have a lot of courage, so I'm not going to give you even any constructive feedback. And I think we've all worked with maybe bosses like that, right? That weren't even willing to tell us anything about how we were doing, and we were starved for some feedback. Or maybe you've been in situations where there's high courage but low consideration. And these are people, they don't mind telling you the junk. They don't mind telling you where you've done bad and where you've done wrong and the bad things, but they never tell you any good things at all, right? They never tell you, any of the positive things that you're doing. What we're going for is a blend of those two things, right? High courage. You're willing to point out some blind spots, willing to point out growth areas and behavior that maybe could be different. And then you also do it in a way that's nice and tactful and kind. And you're willing to also give good, positive feedback. So here's what I'd like you to do actually, is you see on your sheet there, if you've got the note sheet, it asks you to think about someone on your team who's doing a good job and you need to give them specific feedback as clearly as concisely as possible with specific examples. You want to give that feedback about what they're doing and have done well. And then underneath that on page 9, you see, think about someone on your team who's not doing a good job, and you need to give them feedback clearly and concise as possible with specific examples, what they're doing well and what could be done better. So I just want to give you maybe 3 minutes here to choose one of those. Think of somebody that you work with, maybe somebody on your team. And honestly, you may never even give them this feedback, but I want to have you practice writing out some feedback. So you can either choose to practice writing out some positive feedback for that person, or think about someone who's not doing a good job and you need to give them feedback on that performance, okay, and help them know what they're not doing well. So thinking about our to do and to be model, I'm just going to give you 3 minutes. Just practice. What would you say if you were to write out that feedback? All right. So maybe even think about that feeling, behavior, impact model. How would you write it based on that? All right. Everybody clear on what we're doing? All right. So just want you to practice that. Just take, like I said, 3 minutes here, jot down some things. How would you give that feedback to that person in a written format? Give you another minute for this, another minute. All right. I know that wasn't tons of time, but hopefully maybe you jotted a few sentences there. Would anybody be willing to share with us what you wrote? And you don't need to share any names or anything like that if you don't want to. That's totally fine. But thought it'd be interesting maybe to hear a couple of examples of, either some written positive feedback or some written more constructive feedback, and how that was. Would a couple folks be willing to share what you wrote? Fran, can I pick on you? I knew that you were writing something. Would you mind? You don't have to. It's totally fine. But
Okay. Yeah, I was trying to understand this better because I didn't have the worksheet, so I'm like, uh-oh. Anyway, I put on this person, I would say that they were very good with students and faculty and meeting their needs, very attentive, very empathetic, very big asset in our office because we would work in a division office. And the other side was be more attentive on your meeting schedules, changing meetings and updating that we all have to tend to as a staff. But for me, the other aspect of this person outweighs the latter. That's a simple fix. And yeah. So how can I say it? The person's a very good coworker, and we can bounce things off each other and not get upset, because how can I say, she's I'm more, what do you need? What do you want?
Yeah.
And she's like, how can I help you today? What's going on? Is
nice.
So she tries to teach me to soften it up a little, which really helps me, because I'm too I'm like, I got to do this. I got to do that. And so I forget that person doesn't want to interrupt us. They just walked in. You need to take it that aspect and not be like, oh no, you're the 50th person. What do you want?
Yeah, and I would say kind of going back to your feedback, try to make it even more specific, right? What were you saying about the person, like they care for students or they serve students well or something like that. Be really specific. Last week you had a conversation with a student and you really helped them do X, Y, or Z. Like, try to make that as specific as possible. What's some specific behavior that you could point out? And then talk about the impact that it has, maybe on the department or on other people that they work with, right? To really kind of share some of that impact, I think could be really powerful.
Yeah, definitely.
That's good. That's good. How about Z? Could I pick on you? Would you mind?
Sure. What I wrote is that I'm just gonna read what I write. You are very resourceful and is highly organized. You are self-motivated and is able to tackle anything that is given to you, even when you are unsure how to proceed with it. You always give an honest and straightforward advice. Your willingness to help others is inspiring and encourages us to pay it forward.
I love it. I want you to write a feedback for me. I think that sounds fantastic. I love it. Yeah. And did you notice what Z did, right? Use that to be verb in giving very positive feedback, right? Which is great. That's what the one circumstance where you can use that construction. Yeah. So talking about here's who the person is and what they bring to the table. That's good. So again, hopefully this will be something you'll be thinking about as you're even writing out feedback, to maybe think about, feeling, behavior, impact, and then when do you use to do and when do you use to be verbs. All right. How about real quick, what's some advice for receiving feedback well? Again, feel free to unmute yourself, put something in the chat. What if you're the receiver? How do you do that well?
Listen, ask questions. Make sure you understand what they're saying. If you don't understand something, maybe paraphrase it back to them so you can check your understanding.
That's great. Yeah. Make sure you know specifically what they're saying. Yeah. I heard you say this. Is that right? It's really good. What else? If you're receiving feedback.
They're not the enemy.
Oh, good. Yeah.
And they're not necessarily wrong either.
Yeah. Yeah. Even what I've learned is even in the most poorly delivered feedback, right? From maybe an enemy, somebody I hate, whatever, there's always a kernel of truth. If I could just find that kernel, that might help me be a better person. good. That's great. Yeah, and I think, it can be really easy to get really defensive, so kind of in those moments, whether you know it's coming or not, just take it and receive it and say thank you, right? Don't react in the moment. Maybe don't even respond, but just thank the person for the feedback, receive it as a gift, and then, and then think about it, right? But try not to respond in that moment defensively, because that's not going to help you or that other person, really. All right, so we already talked about that. All right, so these are some of the main principles. When you think about people that are personally and interpersonally effective, what do? They really have this mindset, right? That's where it all starts. You see yourself in service to other people, and you identify who are the people are your customers, as it were, and what do they need from you? And you anticipate those needs, and you do your best to try to meet those needs. And then you realize the impact that your words have, and the atmosphere that you could set for yourself and for other people is really important. And then you think about, how do you listen? Do you listen well? Do you listen empathically? People that are personally and interpersonally effective, that's what they do. And then we talked about this idea of giving and receiving feedback, because we don't always do everything right. Other people around us don't always do everything right, but we need to think about, how do we effectively not only give, but receive feedback to others? And we do it when we practice some of these principles. So that's what we found, some of the core of people that are personally and interpersonally effective, those that really have a great influence on those around them, and people are willing to be influenced by them. These are the things that characterize them. So I wanted to see everybody do a little self-evaluation. Okay, think about, of these 4 areas that we talked about: seeing yourself in service to others, kind of minding your language, being a good listener, and giving and receiving feedback. Where do you feel like for you is your biggest area of improvement? So maybe take a second and think about that. You could jot that in there. And then I'd love for everyone to just put that in the chat. What do you feel like for you? What area for you is the biggest area of improvement? Again, is it in this idea of, really thinking of yourself to be in service to others? Is it about thinking about the language you use? Is it about listening? Is it about giving and receiving feedback? What for you is kind of maybe your biggest area of improvement? Language, listening, what I say, how I listen, setting those boundaries, learning how to say no. Yeah, which is all about giving that feedback, right? You can give people feedback in that way. Yep. Receiving maybe more negative feedback. Thank you, Becky. Yeah, it's good. Good. Well, the main principle that we've been talking about here is those who manage themselves well, they listen well, they see themselves in service, they give feedback and they receive back, they're better equipped to positively influence others. That's really what it's all about. So it's been an honor and a pleasure being with you all. Let me just close with this. We'd love to get some of your feedback. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to find my evaluation link and put that in the chat. All right. So we would love to get your feedback for this session. Oh, hold on. There we go. I'm going to pop a link into the chat right now. Hopefully I did the right one. Yep, Fresno Pipe, there it is, personal and interpersonal effectiveness. So I think it's just a short survey. We'd love to just get your thoughts on what you thought of this content and the material and my facilitation, whether you feel like it was helpful for you. So if you wouldn't mind just taking a minute or two right now, grabbing that Survey Monkey link and filling out that survey, that would be super helpful for us. And then, yeah, wanted to see, I know we just have a couple of minutes left here, but wanted to see what questions or comments that you had. Any questions out there? Things that you'd like to know more about?
I did have a question, if you don't mind, Bob.
No, I don't mind at all.
Going over the chart again, the high courage, low and consideration chart.
Yeah.
Like what kind of people they fall into those quadrants.
Yeah. So consideration has to do more with kind of the giving more positive feedback, as it were, or kind of the good things, in your life and that you're doing. And it takes more courage to give more of that developmental feedback. And so somebody who's low in courage and high in consideration, they're only going to tell you the good stuff, right? They're only going to be, it's all the nicey nice stuff, right? Someone who's high in courage and low in consideration, it's all constructive. They never tell you anything good that you've done, right? Somebody that doesn't do either of those, you don't get any feedback at all. They never tell you anything. And so really you want a nice blend of both of those things. You're willing to not only say some of the hard things, but you're also willing to say the good things as well and give both of that feedback. Does that make sense?
Yes, it did. Thank you. I think I just missed the whole chunk of it.
It's all good. It's all good. And the reality is we tend to maybe lean on one more than the other, right? I know for me, it can be really hard to give kind of that difficult feedback. I know other people in my life, they don't mind that at all, right? That's kind of the first thing that they see. And it can be hard for them to kind of think about the positives, right? I've even had friends that will say, well, if I don't tell you anything, that means it was really good. I'm like, well, actually, I'm going to need something. I'm going to need to hear the good things. But there's friends that have said that. Great. Awesome. Well, I'm going to hand it back to Susie then if you got any final words, but otherwise, honestly, it's been a real pleasure, honor, love being with you all. So hopefully we'll get a chance to hang out again. I think I don't think I'm the next one, but I think positively reducing conflict is the next workshop that's being offered. A fantastic one. I'm not sure who's going to be teaching that, but if it's open in your schedule, I would highly encourage you to take advantage of that one. That's a really good one.
Actually, Bob, you closed it out perfectly. You did exactly what I was going to do, mention the evaluation. If you don't click the link, you'll be receiving an email in about 15 minutes saying take the evaluation. And as Bob mentioned, November 15th and the 19th, we're doing our Positively Reducing Conflict series, also on Monday and Friday. That's it. Thank you for joining us, and everybody have a great weekend.
All right. Thanks, everybody. It was fun being with y'all.